Hey, welcome back to the Mr. Excel Netcast. I'm Bill Jelen. Today we have a question that's sent in by Dave. Dave was watching an old podcast, number 453, where we are talking about taking data from the Mega Millions site and getting it in Excel. And in that podcast, I showed how to do a pivot table. But Dave had a simpler question. He said, wait a second, how did you get the data from this website where they have the date, semicolon, colon, the numbers with commas, semicolon, megaball, colon 10, and get it into the columns like you did? So I basically copied that data, I just pasted it into Excel. And I mentioned in the podcast, I just kind of threw off a comment that said I used data text to columns. Well, it wasn't quite that simple. I had to go through and use data text to columns a few different times. The one thing I noticed was that we have a semicolon that seems to separate the date and the numbers. So the first thing I did was I used data text to columns and said that my data was delimited. In the second step, I said it was delimited by a semicolon and clicked finish. So that basically got me three columns. The first column is a pretty nice column with just the date. The next column is a column with all of the numbers, and then finally the Moneyball column. Now, the first thing I would do is I would separate this Moneyball column, use data text to columns. This time, say that my data is delimited and separated by a colon. Now, we don't have a colon, so I'm going to have to put colon there. In the next step, I'm going to get rid of the text that says Moneyball, so I'll click Do Not Import and then click Finish. So now I have my Moneyball column. That works fairly well. I'll label that. The next problem then is I look through column B, I see that some of these start with a colon and others don't. As I scroll down, there's some that have colons and others that don't. So I'm going to select that entire column and use Edit Replace and say that I want to replace every occurrence of a colon with nothing, replace all. Click OK, and now we're ready to do a text to columns to separate out the numbers. I know that there's about 5 numbers for each one, so I'm going to insert 4 extra columns. Select the data set, data, text to columns. Again, my data is delimited. This time it's delimited by just the comma. I'll uncheck everything else. Click finish, and there we have it. All the original numbers and the Moneyball in the rightmost column. And actually in the podcast, I had gone through and had date in column A, number in column B. There was no magic for that. That was simple brute force copying, basically copying columns A and B somewhere, and then copying columns A and C, A and D, A and E, A and F, and finally A and G into a new data set, so that would be easy to pivot. So sometimes with data text to columns, you have to look at the original data set, see if there's some way that you can break it down into a few different problems. In this case, I had to do 3 text to columns as well as an edit replace in order to get the data clean. Hey, thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next time for another netcast from Mr. Excel.